first of all, ravi de vous accueillir. Merci d'avoir fait le temps pour nous aujourd'hui, Monsieur Nadeau-Dubois. So, Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois, right, is the spokesperson for Quebec Solidaire. He's a member of the National Assembly for Gouin, right? He's been a steadfast advocate for progressive politics, social movements. I remember a young man, because I'm a little older than you, right, on the TV screens during the Maple Spring, thinking to myself, this young man is articulate, right? And, you know, I think he's going to go places, right? I think there was a lot of us thinking that back in the day when we looked at those TV screens, right? So here he is to the left of me, right? And he's also written an essay, Tenir Tête, that was a recipient of the Governor General's Literary Awards, right? So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Monsieur Nadeau-Dubois. All right?
Merci beaucoup. Merci. Bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour. Merci de cette présentation. Merci à vous d'être venus. My English is not that good, so I hope you will forgive me two things. The first is my accent, which is pretty bad. And second, I will follow some things I wrote thinking about you guys in the last days. So I hope you will forgive me those two things, because it's my trick when I do a presentation in English to write what I want to say first, because it's, you know, it makes my communication a lot easier. Thank you to the Social Science Festival. Quite a name. It's cool. For giving me the opportunity to have this discussion here today. Really, it's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to go back where things started for me, which is in the Cégep. I was just introduced, but I will do it again. My name is Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois. I'm the spokesperson for Quebec Solidaire. We're a progressive movement fighting for change in Quebec. And what we're trying to do these days is build a coalition to take on François Legault government in the next elections. But before I tell you about that, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and how I entered politics. I'm quite young. I'm one of the youngest members of the National Assembly in Quebec, so sometimes people ask me why I'm there. Just like I said, it all started for me in the Cégep, not very far from here. I was studying at the Cégep Bois de Boulogne, and at the time, I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do in life. So quite naturally, I picked up a social sciences program, and very quickly I realized that there was something wrong. I come from a middle-class background. My parents were never rich, but still in Cégep, I never had to worry about how I was going to pay for university next. I was free to study whatever I chose, because I knew I could afford it. No, but I soon realized in my classroom in Cégep that a lot of my classmates didn't have that kind of freedom. For them, Cégep was about making the right choice right now, because they couldn't afford to make the wrong choice. Cégep for them was about working a lot of hours every week to be able to go to university next. It was 10 years ago, and back then there was a pretty big debate in Quebec about the purpose of higher education, about the mission of our university system. Some people on the conservative side of that debate argued that higher education primary purpose was to serve the job market. They said, we don't really need to fund social sciences programs. We don't really need people to study history or sociology or English. What's the point about all those things? Other people on the progressive side of the debate argue that higher education should serve a higher purpose, that people should be allowed to study history or sociology or English, because the point of all this is not only to, the point of all of this is to teach people to think, not merely to work. Over the years in Quebec, the progressive view of education had won that debate. We had low tuition fees and low student debt, especially when we compare ourselves to the rest of North America. What students paid to study in Quebec was, back then, far lower than what students in the rest of Canada paid. This all changed in 2012 when the Liberal Party of Quebec, who was then at the government, introduced a steep tuition increase in our universities. You may or may not, it's been 10 years, but you may remember what happened next. Over 6 months, a massive social movement that came to be called the Maple String took on the government, and after months of struggle, that movement won. I was one of the spokespeople of that movement, and it taught me many things. It taught me that young people have a lot more power than they think they have. And it taught me that we can achieve a lot when we come together for a common purpose. But the reason I'm telling you about 2012, the reason why I did that long introduction, is to tell you about one story that stayed with me ever since. And it's a story to introduce what I want to tell you guys about identity, which is the topic of your festival. It was during a demonstration. Back in the days, we had demonstrations on every day, but the biggest one was always on the 22nd of each month. So March 22nd, April 22nd, and that story I'm about to tell you happened on May 22nd, which was the third big protest on these dates, and the biggest one of the strike. So it's after the protest just ended, and this young woman comes to me. She looks around 18 years old. She steps up, she shakes my hand. A lot of people were coming to talk to me after those protests. So I think it's only one of many people coming to thank me. So she looks straight at me and she tells me, "Thank you, Gabriel. Thanks to all of you." And then she says this: "You've turned my mother into a Québécoise." Merci, Gabriel. Elle me le dit en français. Merci, Gabriel. Grâce à toi, grâce à toutes vous autres, ma mère est devenue québécoise. So it, quickly captured my attention. I was like, what? What are you trying to tell me? And then she explains to me what she means. She tells me, we've been in Quebec for 4 years, my mother and I, but my mother never really left her home country. She reads only Lebanese newspapers. They were from Lebanon. She only watches Lebanese stations on TV. So she tells me that in her mind, what happened in Quebec society was none of her concern. And anyways, that's what the young woman tells me. Her mother never really understood the debates of Quebec society. But then, when she tells me that story, her eyes, lit up. And she explains to me that the student strike, the student movement, changed everything for her mother. She tells me, and it's the exact quotation because I wrote it a few hours ago after that story. And each time I tell that story, I go back to those original notes. So she tells me, my sister and I wore the carré rouge and took part in the marches every night. So my mother was kind of forced to take an interest in what was going on because she was missing her 2 daughters every night. She tells me that little by little, her mother found herself almost obsessively reading and watching whatever was being said or wrote about the strike. Each night, she peppered her daughters with questions about the progress of the movements. When are the next protests? What are the dates of the meetings? What decision will the assembly of the students take? She wanted to know everything about that movement. And one evening, the discussion heats up because the husband really is against the mobilization of the students in which his own two daughters are participating. So the discussion eats up around the dinner table, and then the mother, exclaims herself, and she says to her husband, "But that's not what we want. We in Quebec, we want accessible education." And when this young woman tells me her story, she was like radiant. And she tells me, "We in Quebec, that's something I've never heard my mother say." That's what I mean. This movement made a Québécoise out of her. Nous, au Québec, j'avais jamais entendu ma mère dire quelque chose comme ça. C'est ça que je veux dire quand je te dis que la grève l'a rendue québécoise. And I don't think it is pointless for me to mention that that young woman was wearing a hijab. Like all young people protesting that year, she had been excluded from the political process. But moreover, as a Muslim woman wearing a religious symbol, she felt even more sidelined by politicians. But when she took up a cause with her fellow Quebecers, when she fought side by side with others to reclaim their future, she finally felt that she belonged. It's an incredibly, for me, it's an incredibly powerful story. And it's with that story that I want to enter in the topic of this year's festival, identity. Identity can mean many things to many different people. I'm a proud supporter of the Canadien Montréal, and even though it can be a tough love relationship, sometimes it's part of my personal identity as much as it's something I shared with many people in this room and millions of other people in Quebec. Manon Massé, which is my co-spokesperson for Quebec Solidaire, is a proud member of the LGBTQ community, and she was out there all weekend in the last days defending trans people from a very damaging piece of legislation the government of Quebec introduced a few days ago. Manon, in the last years, taught me how crucial gender identity can be for many people's sense of belonging. And then you have, and that's the personal identity of people. And then you have another kind of identity, our collective identity. What binds us together as Quebecers, and once again, it's the stage of a political battle between the conservative and the progressive vision of Quebec. I don't know if you follow politics a little bit, but in the last few weeks, I've had several difficult conversations with Premier François Legault on the topic of identity. Premier Legault has a very specific definition of what it means to be a Quebecer. He believes Quebecers are the people who support Bill 21, the so-called religious symbols law. And for the past 3 years, he has sought to draw a line between those he considers true Quebecers and those who are against his bill, Bill 21. I have a very different point of view. But when I told Premier Legault that I had a different point of view, he got a bit angry. And he called me a woke. I think he meant it as an insult, I think. And in his mind, to be woke is to be against Quebec, the Québécois nation, and the Québécois values. I don't really like that word, woke, because I think it doesn't mean anything. And I really don't like how this word is used to divide and exclude people. For too long, conservative politicians like Mr. Legault have decided it was up to them to decide who was a Quebecer, who wasn't a Quebecer, who belonged here and who didn't. They took it upon themselves to define what are Quebec's values. I think it's time to set the record straight. I think all Quebecers belong in Quebec, whether they agree with Premier Legault or not. I don't think it's woke to believe in equality. I don't think it's radical to have a frank conversation about racism and how it affects our communities. I don't think immigration is a sin. I see it as a strength. Moreover, I believe those values are proud Quebecois values too. I look at Quebec's history, and what I see is a story of hope, a story of solidarity. I see a story of people coming together to strive for equality and justice. I see people coming together to build the institutions we rely on today. Our healthcare system, for example, our education system, the very cégep we are standing in. All these things we take for granted today, while they are the result of our parents and grandparents fighting for. And I think we should take pride in that. We were in Quebec, we were one of the first places in the world, I don't know if you know this, to formally outlaw discrimination about gay and lesbian people and allow people to fight such discrimination in the courts. That's something I take pride in, and we should take pride in. We have a long history of fighting for equality between men and women. And as we speak, Canada is currently scrambling to come up with their own version of the daycare system that was introduced here 20 years ago in Quebec. I think that's also something we should take pride in. Social progress is a Quebecois value too. Solidarity is a Quebecois value too. The politics of identity have come to divide us into groups that may never hope to work together or even engage in a meaningful dialogue. I reject that narrative. I believe in the politics of solidarity. I believe we are stronger when we fight together to lift everyone up. To defend Quebec, we must first defend the people of Quebec. We must fight for the right of all Quebecers to a better future. We cannot fight sexism and misogyny without fighting for free daycare and shelters for victims of domestic violence, for example. We cannot fight racism and discrimination without fighting for affordable housing and healthcare funding and better paid jobs. To defend Quebec is not merely to find pride in what lays behind, but to find pride in what we can achieve together on the road ahead. To me, identity is a matter of purpose. Our common purpose as Quebecers is to build a better future. What is this common purpose? Well, we are facing several crises in Quebec at once. The COVID-19 crisis, you know very well. But there are other crises. The housing crisis, you might know if you already live on your own. Housing is becoming increasingly scarce, and as they say, the rent is too damn high. So many students are forced to live in poverty because it's become impossible to find affordable housing here in Montreal and elsewhere in Quebec. You know, in a decade or so, you're going to be on the market to buy your first house. And you might not be able to afford $500,000 for a tiny condo apartment in Montreal. That's the future we're looking at. We need to come together and make it our purpose to fix that housing crisis. It's a matter of equality and solidarity. We are also suffering from another crisis, which is an epidemic of mental health issues. You might have noticed people around you dealing with anxiety and depression. You may deal with it yourself. My generation, your generation, is increasingly adept at talking about these things, but they really affect people of all backgrounds in Quebec, yet services are far and few between. It's almost impossible to see a psychologist without paying out of pocket today in Quebec. We need to come together and make it our purpose to fix that mental health crisis. Again, it's a matter of equality and solidarity. And then there's the challenge of the century. You may have heard a little bit about it, and of course I'm talking about climate change. For generations, politicians have treated climate change as if it was something to worry about later, you know, as a distant blip on the radar. But my generation and yours know better than to think climate change is our future. Climate change is in fact our present. We are already in the middle of climate change. You know, it's the blistering heat that forces us to stay indoors in front of an AC unit for days on end in the summer. It's the flooded basements come spring. It's the forest fires we've seen ravage millions of hectares of land all across North America. It's the extreme weather threatening communities on the coast of the St. Lawrence River. You know, I think protecting the environment is also a Quebecois value. In fact, it might be one of the most Quebecois values of all. We are a people of forests, lakes, and rivers. Time and time again, we have fought to protect our landscapes from pipelines and from the oil and gas industry. Protecting the environment is something that unites Quebecers across generations. Yet, we've fallen behind. We've been left behind by generations of politicians who have failed to unite us against the greatest challenge of all. Because climate change is also a major factor of inequality. It amplifies the inequalities that already existed between the haves and the have-not on a global scale. It also amplifies the inequalities that permeate Quebec society today. The big polluters, of course, those who are responsible for climate change, are not going to be the big sufferers of the consequences of climate change. That's why fixing our climate and preparing for the consequences of climate change is also a matter of equality and solidarity. I think that's the main thing I draw from the story I told you about earlier. It's that identity is not only or not merely an heritage. It is also, and I think mainly, a project. It is something that is in front of us that we build together. I think that conception of Quebec identity has not been talked enough in the last years. When you heard about Quebec's identity in the media, it was more than often because politicians were talking about it to say who was not in that identity or who was threatening that identity. I think it is a very big problem in our political life, and I think we can and have to do better than that. I think we can muster the spirit of change that modern Quebec rose from 50 years ago. I think we can reach out to that generation, the old one, to build a green Quebec for our children to grow in. Yes, we must first embrace that idea of identity through the politics of solidarity. Personally, the climate crisis has become the cornerstone of my political engagement. It can also become, I think, the center of the Quebec project. And I use the word project on purpose because that's what it is. Not a fixed identity, but a living and breathing project we all belong in. And I think it's important for young people to rise up and to make that project theirs. Because I think you have more power than you may think. You have more influence on our politics than what the conservatives would want you to believe. And if you don't like where the story is heading, well, you can change the story. If you don't feel part of the Quebec identity that is being put forward by the people governing us today, it's a reason to get involved and to change that narrative and to define a new and a more inclusive and a better Quebec identity. You know, I am a proud Quebecer because I think we have achieved great things together. I am a proud Quebecer because I know we can achieve so much more. I believe in a nation of common purpose. You know, what conservative politicians believe is in reclaiming the past, and their conception of identity is always in referral to the past. What I believe is that it's time to reclaim our future. It's time to talk about identity in a positive way. That's what that young woman told me, I think, 10 years ago this year. That because she was fighting for something better with people of her generation, people that were from all backgrounds and all origins, she felt that she was becoming part of something bigger than herself, which is Quebec. And that was so strong that even her mother, which was a recent immigrant, living her life still in her home country, seeing her daughters, because there were 2 daughters, fighting for something better in Quebec, it gave her the sense that she was part of something. That's, I think, how we should talk about identity. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. We're going to take questions now. So anybody that has a question that they'd like Monsieur Nadeau-Dubois answer, this is your moment, folks. You often sit in our classrooms. I'm a political science teacher. I'm sure your sociology, history teachers will all tell you, you know, you feel powerless. You feel you don't have access to elected officials. Well, he's standing in front of you today, all right? So it's time, right? Any concerns, questions that you have? I need one person to break the ice, and that person's going to start it, and then we'll get going, all right? Here we go.
Well, first of all, hello.
Bonjour, hello.
So I think I've understood that you were against the Bill 21. And so I would like you to clarify some of your arguments against it, please, if you could.
Yes, well, yes, I'm against Bill 21. I could give you a very long answer because there are, I think, a lot of reasons to be against that bill. But to go to the essential point, I think the separation between the religions and public institutions is a very important principle. I think no one would want to live in a society where, for example, what you are taught in a classroom is, you know, has a religious bias into it. I think no one would want to live in a society where the laws governing us have a religious bias into it. It's a huge social progress historically to get rid of the influence of religion in public institutions and in our laws. I think what Bill 21 does is thinking that because there should be no religion in our institutions and in our laws, there should be no religions. Let me do that once again. What Bill 21 does, I think Bill 21 is based on a confusion. And that confusion is to think that if there is visually something religious on the person, then it means that the institution is not neutral anymore. I think that's the main confusion around Bill 21. You know, people talk a lot about secularism as the foundation of that law. I am in favor of secularism. I support the idea of laïcité. Laïcité, secularism, mean that in a democratic society, everyone should be equal no matter their religion, or even if they have a religion or not. What Bill 21 does is saying that when you go inside a public institution, religion should become invisible. I think that's a mistake. I think people are not more religious if they have a visible religious symbol than if they do not. And preventing them from having a job they want and they like because they wear a religious symbol that is visible is sending a very dangerous message to those people. It's sending the message that they're not wanted fully in Quebec and that their contribution to Quebec society is not fully wanted and appreciated. And I don't agree with sending that message.
There was another hand up somewhere around. All right. Where am I going? Okay, I'm coming here first.
It was a very long way to say we can be in favor of secularism and of equality of all people, and we should do both. We should be in favor of those two principles, not one, not the other, both of them.
Okay, I'm going to go here. I'm going to make my way to the other side and back down, all right?
Bonjour, allô?
Bonjour.
Donc, ma question, c'est que, well, I'll say it in English. What are your views on the fact that the ethic, culture, and religion class will be changed into a Quebec culture class?
It's a good question. I think it's a diversion of international caliber. If they were like the Olympics of political diversion, that would win the gold medal. There are schools in Quebec that have no drinking water right now. There are children in public schools in Quebec that cannot have this, children that have a difficulty of learning cannot have the help they need because there's not enough personnel inside our public schools. We have a Minister of Education that has completely failed to solve those problems. What do you do as a government when you feel that that minister is severely attacked, that he's losing credibility, that the whole education system is crumbling? Well, you invent a debate that will divide people and get their attention away from this. And what best topic to do that than identity and religion? And it's the oldest strategy, it's the oldest political strategy in the world. To say to people, don't look don't look at the schools crumbling, but fight around a course that a lot of people never had because it's a pretty recent course, and try to polarize around that issue. It's a very classic strategy. And that's why you will not hear me a lot I will say it in French. Vous n'allez pas m'entendre beaucoup alimenter ce débat-là parce que je pense que c'est une stratégie de diversion. The new course they're putting forward has in fact a lot in common with the old one they're saying they want to replace. In fact, the majority of the content seems to be the same. And was that course perfect? Probably not. It's always a good idea to modernize the curriculums, So and that reform has been announced like 5 times in the last years. So I really honestly think it is something to salvage a Minister of Education that is fastly losing credibility.
Right, thank you. Hey, on peut demander des questions en français. Monsieur Nadeau-Dubois, vous êtes libre à répondre en français aussi.
I need to practice my English.
Okay.
I have an election
Perfect.
in 1 year, so
I
gotta,
I'm not going to stand in your way. We've been running things bilingually since the start of the day, but, everybody can feel free. All right?
No problem.
Hey, I just wanted to build 21 for good.
It's a good question. First, we need to change the government because that government will defend its law as long as it's in power. We always said at Quebec Solidaire, if we were to form the next government, we would modify it to keep what's good in this law, which is, for example, the affirmation that religion and state has to be separated. Everyone agrees with that. To keep the fact, for example, that there is not anymore a cross over the throne of the President of the National Assembly. I think that's something from the past. I think it's important to say in the Quebec's Charter of Rights and Freedoms that everyone is equal and that our public institutions are not religious, that they're secular. Everyone agrees with that. But I don't think young women, especially young Muslim women, should be banned from teaching in our schools because of what they wear on their head. So that's what we've been saying for years. If we are the next government, we will do those modifications to the bill. And political parties have to be clear about what they want to do with that law. We are clear.
There was a hand somewhere around here. Yeah.
Okay, so bonjour, hi.
Hi.
I just have 2 questions actually. The first one is, in which political part are you in again?
Québec Solidaire.
Okay, Quebec Solidaire. Okay, and the second one was, how tough was it to enter politics?
The honest answer to that question is that I have a very, very unique trajectory in life. And I don't say unique as a way of glorifying it. I just mean a very particular trajectory. When I was very young, I was just like propelled in front of a huge social movement, a huge student movement, a huge student mobilization. I became suddenly someone that people recognize in the streets. And I also became suddenly someone in which a lot of people put their hopes in. Took me a few years to understand what that meant and what I was supposed to do with that big and sometimes vertiginous heritage. Took me 5 years to think about it. What will I do with this? With the fact that people are stopping me in the streets and are telling me, go into politics, you're going to be the next premier, I was 21 years old when 21 years old when all that happened. It's young to be on front of the stage like that. So it took me 5 years to think about it. And in 2017, a woman called Françoise David, which was then the spokesperson of Québec Solidaire and the member of the National Assembly for the riding of Gouin, which is in the Rosemont-La Petite Patrie neighborhood, called me and told me, I'm resigning, I'm leaving office, I need someone to come into Québec Solidaire to take the torch and to continue the fight for solidarity in Quebec. I was not expecting that call. I was finishing my master's degree at the time, but it's sometimes those type of offers you can't refuse because she's a huge monument in the history of Quebec politics, and I had 2 weeks to take a decision. So I went to Mexico on the beach 1 week alone to say, well, am I going to do that with my life? And the proposal was so wonderful that I said yes. And I was elected in a by-election in 2017 with a pretty good score, and I'm there still then. So it's a very particular trajectory. I don't think it can be replicated in a lot of exemplaries, but what I do think, and it may be some kind of my advice to you, is that I never planned to go into politics. It was never a career plan. There is no traditional, there is no ordinary trajectory to go into politics. You have to follow your art, you have to do what you want to do, you have to fight the fights that you want to fight. You need to be involved in your society, in your community, in your campus or in your working place. And then by involving yourself in all those places, you may find a way into politics, but don't plan it. When you plan it, it's boring, and I think it's not efficient, because people are good in politics when they have done something else in their life. I'm very young, but I did that huge mobilization. It gave me a momentum I kept with me, and here I am. But it was not a plan. It's a lot more of a coincidence. And I don't know for how long I'm going to do politics. Probably not my whole life.
Okay. Do we have any other questions in the room? Yep.
Bonjour. Vous avez mentionné justement une nouvelle loi à propos du LGBTQ+, avec Manon Massé qui a fait pas des messages, mais des apparences.
Oui.
C'est quoi cette loi-là en particulier?
Oui, il y a un projet de loi qui a été déposé la semaine dernière c'est une vaste réforme du droit de la famille. Donc, ça couvre énormément de sujets, mais ça traite notamment de l'enjeu de l'identité de genre. Et il y a un article dans cette loi, l'article 23, qui précise que dorénavant, pour faire changer sa mention de sexe à l'état civil, donc auprès du gouvernement, il va falloir faire la démonstration qu'on a subi une opération chirurgicale pour intervenir sur nos organes génitaux directement, donc pour changer l'apparence de nos organes génitaux. Ça représente un recul de 15 ans pour les droits des personnes trans au Québec, qui jusqu'à maintenant pouvaient faire appel au gouvernement et dire « J'ai transitionné, par exemple, d'homme à femme, je souhaite que dans les yeux du gouvernement, ce soit écrit que je suis une femme. » Et le gouvernement disait oui, on va changer ça, tchic, pas de problème. Dorénavant, il faudrait faire la démonstration qu'on a reçu une opération. Il faut savoir, hein, c'est à peu près juste une personne trans sur 3 qui subit une opération chirurgicale pour physiquement intervenir sur ses organes génitaux. Beaucoup de gens font une transition, mais sont à l'aise avec leur corps. En tout cas, ne sentent pas le besoin de faire une chirurgie. Ce projet de loi-là, ce qu'il fait, on ne sait pas encore si c'est une simple maladresse de la part du gouvernement, par ignorance, ou si c'est une attaque volontaire aux droits des personnes trans. Le résultat, c'est que des gens seraient obligés de vivre une chirurgie passablement invasive, difficile, pour faire reconnaître leur changement de genre au niveau du gouvernement. Pour nous, c'est inacceptable. C'est un recul historique et on compte bien se battre très fort pour que ça n'arrive pas.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? I think we have one from the live stream, actually. It disappeared. Wow, okay. So the person, maybe you answered his question or was asked in the room. Anybody else have any other questions, folks? We still have a little bit of time. Yep. Let me go across here.
Salut Gabriel.
Salut.
Par la dernière année, on a commencé à voir le terme racisme systémique apparaître beaucoup dans les médias. D'après toi, comment est-ce qu'on peut, je sais pas comment dire, peut-être pas résoudre le problème, mais comment est-ce qu'on peut améliorer les choses?
Ouais. Ce qui est dommage, c'est que certaines personnes en politique et dans les médias ont décidé de faire tout un plat avec ce concept, cette notion de racisme systémique, et l'ont récupéré à des fins politiques. Et ces gens-là martèlent depuis des années, à chaque occasion qu'ils ont, que reconnaître le racisme systémique, ce serait accuser tous les Québécois d'être racistes. Bon. Quand on connaît l'histoire du Québec, on peut s'imaginer la réaction de beaucoup de gens qui entendent des politiciens voir le premier ministre du Québec en personne, c'est pas rien, dire ceux qui parlent de racisme systémique là, sont en train de tout vous traiter de raciste. Comment tu penses que les gens réagissent? Non, voyons donc, ça n'a pas d'allure. Puis les gens deviennent défensifs, puis ils se ferment. Puis ils n'écoutent plus. C'est normal, quand le premier ministre du Québec lui-même détourne comme ça le sens des mots, que ça génère cette réticence-là. C'est très dommage. Pourtant, le racisme systémique, c'est quelque chose de très simple. Hein. Ça veut juste dire que si tu es une personne d'une minorité visible au Québec, c'est plus difficile que les autres de te trouver une job, c'est plus difficile que les autres de te trouver un logement, mais c'est plus facile de te faire interpeller par la police. C'est juste ça que ça veut dire. Puis lutter contre ça, c'est lutter pour une société dans laquelle tout le monde partirait un peu plus sur le même pied d'égalité dans la vie, puis tout le monde aurait les mêmes chances d'aller aussi loin qu'ils ou elles le veulent. C'est aussi simple que ça. Puis moi, la contribution que j'essaie d'avoir dans ce débat-là, c'est de faire ce que je viens de faire là. Dégonfler la balloune, comme on dit en bon québécois, expliquer ces choses-là de manière très simple, dire qu'il n'y a personne qui fait le procès de personne. Il n'y a personne qui dit que le Québec est plus raciste qu'un autre endroit ou un autre pays. Le racisme, c'est un problème dans plein de sociétés, dans à peu près toutes les sociétés à travers le monde. C'est pas une compétition à savoir qui est plus ou moins raciste, puis on l'est-tu plus, on l'est-tu moins. C'est pas ça l'important. C'est comme de dire, est-ce que les Québécois francophones, historiquement, dans l'histoire du Québec, ont fait l'objet de certaines discriminations, puis de formes de racisme, et même systémique? Bien sûr. Mais c'est pas une compétition, là. On ne devrait pas essayer de voir c'est qui est le plus ou moins discriminé. On devrait juste s'entendre sur le fait qu'on veut vivre dans une société où il n'y en a pas de racisme, où il n'y en a pas de discrimination. Regarder où il y en a, puis régler le problème, puis appeler les choses par leur nom. Moi, je pense que ça pourrait être aussi simple que ça. Ça pourrait être aussi simple que ça.
Okay. Any other questions? Who's next? No? I have to abuse my privileges as a host or pick a volunteer. Oh, there is a question on the stream. Okay. Okay, so the question is, what are the solutions that Quebec is now taking to tackle climate change?
Not enough solutions. The government of Quebec put forward a plan called un plan pour l'énergie verte, je crois, PEV. That plan was written a year and a half ago. And that plan, I won't go into the details, but what you need to know is that that plan is not enough for Quebec to reach the targets of reductions of greenhouse gas emissions who were given to us by the scientific community. It permits us to, if my recollection is good, it permits us to obtain, I think, like maybe half of them of those targets. So that plan is not good enough, and it's frustrating because in Quebec we should be one of the leaders around the world in terms of fighting climate change. We already have an abundance of green energy. We are in a very privileged situation on that issue. We could be in front of that fight, and we're not. And not only we're not, but our government is actually taking very bad decisions that are putting us backwards. For example, you've heard about the infamous project of Le Troisième Lien, which is a huge $10 billion tunnel that François Legault wants to build underneath the St. Lawrence River in the region of Quebec, in Quebec City. You know, that project only will add 55,000 cars each day in downtown Quebec City. So that's greenhouse gas emissions that are going to be added to our actual emissions. In 2021, we should not be adding more tunnels, more highways. We should be building green infrastructure. We should be building public transit. Unfortunately, that's not what our government is doing right now, and that's a very, very, very big problem, and it's probably the main reason why I am in politics right now, is because we cannot wait any longer. The climate cannot wait any longer. We need to do drastic changes right now to our economy and to our lifestyle if we want to be able to meet that challenge. It's already too late, so we cannot wait more.
I want to ask a follow-up on that.
Yes.
You know, is the Quebec government sending any provincial representatives to the COP26 next week? If so, do you know who they are and what the official stance of our provincial government is at those negotiations in Scotland?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the Quebec government will send its environment minister, Mr. Benoit Charette. Mr. Legault has also announced that as a premier, he will be attending the COP26. I guess he'll want to say that he leads a green government. From my perspective, the good news is that there will also be a representative of Québec Solidaire in that delegation. My colleague Émilie Lessard-Terrien will be there, and there will be a vast coalitions of green organizations from Quebec that will also be in Glasgow to put into context the statements of Mr. Legault.
Okay, anybody else have any questions? Yep, I'm coming around.
We have two questions. So my first question is that, is it possible that in the near future we'll be able to have better access to mental health? So for instance, if you want to have access to a psychologist, that it won't necessarily have to be so expensive as it is today?
The problem right now, it's a very good question. One of our problems right now is that mental health is not recognized in our public healthcare system on the same level as normal or physical healthcare. It should be. You know, if you want to meet me after and you go down the stairs and you fall and you break your leg, you will know that you will go to the hospital, they will take care of you, it will be free. You won't be asking yourself, where I should go, should I go there or there, will I wait like a year and a half to get my leg fixed? No, you'll just go to the public healthcare system and they'll take care of you, and well, maybe you'll wait few hours, but I mean, you're not asking yourself, will I be taken care of? You know you will be. It should be the same thing with mental health. People should not be asking themselves, where should I go? What should I do? If they have a mental health problem, they should just go to their local public clinic, which we once used to call the CLSC. They should just go there. They should be able to access quickly a mental health professional, maybe a psychologist, maybe a social worker, maybe there are a few mental health professionals, and they all have their roles into this, but people should be able to go receive free, public, and fast mental health care. And it should be as simple as if you break your leg. There should be no difference. But that means investing. And that means, in particular, investing into the salaries and the working conditions of those professionals, which are, in vast majority, women. You need to pay them if you want them to work into the public system. Do you know that there is more psychologists per capita in Quebec than in Ontario? So we don't lack psychologists. The problem is that we don't pay them well inside the public system, so they go into the private system, and in the private system they charge whatever they want, and they have to pay the bill, so they charge high rates that a lot of people don't have the means to pay. So you need to put money in the public system, get them back into the public system, and make them work on a good salary and with good working conditions. And it should be simple. You should give your carte soleil and receive, mental health care. It should be as simple as that. There's no way like to revolutionize everything. We should just go back to the basic.
Okay, thank you. Also, the next following question was, what are your personal views on mental health and what we can do?
Well,
or like Quebec Solidaire's views on mental health.
Well, it should be given freely, just like other healthcare is given freely, because we are in a society where we think health is public. We think it's not a merchandise. You should not pay for this. And there is no reasonable or medical reason to exclude mental health from that logic. Just like if I can, just like there's no reason why dental health is not covered by our system, or eye care. All parts of our body should be covered by our healthcare system, and that includes the mental side of our health. It should be covered in the public system.
It unfortunately took a pandemic and confinement to make people realize that healthcare or mental health issues are important.
And maybe it's one of the good side of the pandemic. I think a lot of people are realizing that we are in the middle of a mental health crisis. I think that crisis existed before the pandemic. I think the pandemic may have, I hope, opened the eyes of a lot of people that, you cannot let a whole generation fall into that crisis without helping them and putting strong measures in place. It's not done yet. We need to do more. But at least right now, we're talking about it. This was not being talked about before. And I saw, Carey Price announcement that he was retiring for mental health reasons. Jonathan Drouin did the same thing a few months ago. It may just look like, sports news, but I think it's a signal that now it's okay to talk about those things, that there's no shame in it. And when, idols like that, which a lot of people look up to, when those guys do it and say it, I think it's an illustration that we're going in the right direction. Not fast enough. I'm not saying everything's done, but now we can talk about those things. It's not a problem anymore to admit that you have mental health problems in more and more circles. So that's a sign that we're going towards a better situation, I hope.
Yeah, it definitely helps. Sauf
Of
que
course.
les autres, ils peuvent se payer les soins.
La différence, c'est
Ça-
qu'eux, ils n'ont pas de problème à se payer les meilleurs soins au monde.
Exactement.
Ce que la majorité des gens n'ont pas, bien sûr.
But credit to them for opening the doors. Okay,
Of course.
folks. Anybody else questions? We might have some time for one or two more. Right? Okay. I don't think he wants to field questions about Montreal Canadiens. Not these days, at least. Yeah.
Bonjour. So I just wanted to ask you, do you believe that your ideas and your future direction as a representative of Quebec Solidaire will benefit only Quebec in the long run as an individual province? Or do you hope to maybe potentially see the changes that you strive for also influence other provinces and keep Quebec connected to Canada as well?
I think the best thing Quebec can do for not only Canada but North America as a whole is do the demonstration here. There is okay, is it working? Yeah, okay. So I think the best thing that Quebec can do for Canada, and of course the rest of North America, is to make the demonstration that there is another type of society possible. I think people need examples in North America that it's possible to build a new society, a very different society with a different system. For example, it means creating a new partnership with First Nations. You go negotiating nation to nation with them, a new constitutional order in which they will be fully respected, which they are not in the actual constitutional order of Canada. And I think that's by setting that example, by showing that it's possible to build something different than something else, it is the best way we can influence the rest of Canada and the rest of North America. With them saying, oh, it's possible to do it, we should also do it here. So I don't think it's a dilemma between doing, changing Quebec and building a Quebec that is a different society, a just country, a country where we build a new relationship with First Nations, or a Quebec that influences Canada to be a more progressive country. I think we can do both. If we change Quebec, if we invent that new country and that new project of society here, we will set an example for other progressive people in the rest of Canada and in the States. They will say, oh, it's possible to do something else. Let's do it.
In your opinion, in your opinion, should the government be more involved or less involved in order to rebuild in order to build more green infrastructure?
Oh, I think the government has to be more involved. I think what we are seeing I think we will not meet the challenge of climate change, which is a huge challenge, only by individual or private initiatives. I think we need a strong and coordinate intervention of public powers. We will need very significant infrastructures to fight the flooding that will be happening all across Quebec. We will need to salvage the thousands, tens of thousands of people whose homes will be challenged because of the erosion, because of the rise of the sea levels. That will cost money, and we will have to do it together. We won't be able. It's a bad idea to say to those people, just do it yourself in your corner. So we need more than ever a strong state and strong public services to meet the challenge of climate change. Individual initiatives are good, It's a good thing they happen. Private initiatives are good. It's a good thing they happen. But it won't be enough. It won't be enough. I have the deep conviction that we need a collective effort which is unprecedented, maybe similar to what Europe did after the Second World War in terms of reconstruction. But we need a unprecedented effort to build society on new bases and to protect ourselves from the effects of climate change, who have already begun and will continue to happen.
Just one more thing. How will the government succeed in, like, instead of failing consistently?
Yeah. It's a good question.
Hard, I mean.
Governments don't always fail. They have failed a lot in the last years. I agree with you, but governments don't always fail. When developed countries came out of the Second World War, there was in North America and in Europe, there was an awakening that social injustice and huge inequalities in Western democracies had provoked the rise of fascism, of Hitlerism, all across democracies, and of anti-Semitism. And there was all across the world a huge wave of governments saying, okay, we need to tackle inequality, we need to build a more fair society, and in a matter of years, huge social systems were built. Huge systems of redistribution of wealth were built in the years after the Second World War, because there was a conscience that inequality was a threat to democracy. Let's put it that way. We are in a very similar position right now. Of course, inequality is on the rise, but the huge issue is climate change. And we need to realize that climate change is not only threatening our economy, it's threatening our democracy, it's threatening everything we want and believe in and need. So we need an effort from with the same amplitude than the effort of the post-Second World War to build new institutions to fight that. But we have done it in the past. We have done it in the past. Quebec did it in the past. The Quiet Revolution happened in 15 years, 10 years, 15 years. And in a matter of one generation, Quebec society was the place where, one of the places on earth, well, in developed nations, where the woman went less to school and to work. And in one and a half generation, we were then one of the places where women contribute the most in the job market. So we have done the demonstration in the past that we can change things fast. If there is a will, if there is a mobilization, if we put pressure on the governments, they can act quickly and they can make good things. It just hasn't been happening in a while, I agree with you. But one of the history of the past is that we can do it.
Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Okay, so folks, this draws to a close our first day. We still have tomorrow and Thursday. Tomorrow morning, Horatio Arruda is coming in to speak to us about health identity, Quebecers' health identity, right? Monsieur Nadeau-Dubois, encore une fois, merci beaucoup de votre visite et d'avoir pris le temps de nous jaser aujourd'hui. All right, folks, so thank you very much to you for attending and have a good evening, people.